The rain fell softly on the marble steps of Capitol Hill. Inside the rotunda was too quiet for a Thursday afternoon. J.D. Vance stood by a long corridor window, staring out as cameras prepared to roll once more. But this time, there were no late-night hosts, no laughter tracks, no Hollywood lights. Just a congressional hearing room, 24 reporters, and millions watching live. The Senate Oversight Committee had called the emergency hearing after J.D. Vance's now viral clash with Stephen Colbert and his explosive 60 Minutes interview. What was meant to be entertainment had evolved into a political wildfire. Tonight, Vance was not a guest. He was the headline. The gavel struck. Senator Vance began Chairman Darrell Holmes, a Democrat from California. You've accused mainstream media of dividing Americans. You've claimed this city mocks rural voters and pushes narratives disconnected from real lives. Is that your official position? Vance didn't blink. It's not a position, he said. It's an observation backed by every family I've talked. I've met across Ohio. You can ignore their pain, but you can't erase it. Murmurs spread through the room. Reporters took notes. Cameras zoomed in. Holmes leaned forward, voice sharpening. Yet you also walked off a national television show. Instead of finishing a discussion, you claimed to want dialogue, but isn't that the opposite? Vance gave a small, tight smile. All due respect, Chairman, a dialogue needs to people listening, not one person shouting jokes while another defends people's livelihoods. I walked off because I'm not a punchline. The room stiffened. Across the country, televisions buzzed as Americans tuned in barbershops in Kentucky, diners in Idaho, college lounges in Michigan. Everyone watching the senator who turned a talk show clash into a national moment. Meanwhile, in a corner of the hearing room, Caroline Leavitt sat quietly, hands folded, eyes fixed. She wasn't just observing, she was guiding. After all the backroom chaos of the week, she knew one thing. J.D. Vance had just crossed into a different arena, and nothing would be the same after. A new voice entered the exchange. Senator Malek, actor from Maryland, known for his fiery rhetoric, leaned into the mic. Senator Vance, he said, you've painted yourself as a voice for the forgotten, but you're stoking resentment. You didn't just criticize the media, you accused them of betraying America. Don't you think that's dangerous? Vance sat forward, eyes narrowed. Senator Acto, he said evenly, it's more dangerous to pretend nothing's broken. When comedians become gatekeepers of political truth, when coastal elites sneer at truck drivers and soldiers and single moms in Appalachia, that's not harmless satire. It's poison wrapped in punchlines. A hushed silence fell. For a moment, even the cameras seemed still. People laughed until they didn't. Vance continued. Now they're listening. And they're angry. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter. It was worn, creased, and signed in blue ink. This is from a steelworker in Youngstown, he said. He lost his job. His wife lost her health insurance. His son overdosed. And the only thing he sees on TV are jokes about hillbillies and rednecks. This hearing may forget him. I won't. He slid the letter across the table. The audience was silent. No gasps, no applause, just the weight of honesty hanging in the air. The chair adjourned the hearing shortly after. Reporters rushed out. Clips went live within minutes. Headlines exploded. Vance turned Senate hearing into cultural showdown truth or theatrics. J.D. Vance sparks new divide from late. Night 2 Senate Spotlight, how one interview changed everything backstage. Caroline Leavitt found him leaning against the wall, tying his tie looser. You understand what just happened in there, she asked. He looked at her, tired but focused. I think the media just realized I'm not here to play by their rules. She nodded slowly. And now they'll try to break you. I hope they try, he said, because every time they do, the truth gets louder. That night, Stephen Colbert issued a statement on his show. It was careful, scripted, and halfway between an explanation and a defense. But behind the polished delivery, you could hear it the tremor of someone who knew the tables had turned. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance released a quiet video on his social media, shot on his phone from his backyard. No suits, no teleprompter, just his voice. Real. America's not glamorous. It's tired, it's working double shifts. It's wondering why the people on TV laugh when they cry. If I have to walk out of every studio and every Senate hearing to tell their stories, I will. That video hit 40 million views in 2 days. And in the heart of Washington, a quiet buzz grew into a thunder. This wasn't just a media moment. It was the start of something larger, a realignment, a reckoning. And J.D. Vance had walked right into it one step ahead of them all. The morning after the audio leak, headlines erupted across both liberal and conservative outlets. Colbert caught silencing guest off mic was J.D. Vance set up by the media. Hashtag Let Him Speak becomes rallying cry across party lines. The atmosphere in the White House was tense. Caroline Leavitt sat across from Chief of Staff Henry Willows in a windowless briefing room. A large screen behind them showed real-time social media heat maps. Ohio, Iowa, and parts of Georgia glowed in read indicating surges in keyword clusters. Media censorship. Real Americans, Vance speaks for us. This isn't just a moment, Willows said, his tone grave. It's a movement. And it's not even election year yet. Leavitt nodded slowly. It's cultural combustion. And we underestimated the kindling. Meanwhile, in Ohio, J.D. Vance stood quietly behind a curtain at a town hall in a high school gym. The bleachers were full. No cameras were allowed. Number? CNN or Fox News trucks outside? It's just 1,000 people and a stage. He stepped out to applause that grew louder as he took the mic. I wasn't supposed to speak tonight, Vance began, his voice calm but firm. I was supposed to be shut down. The crowd hushed. But I won't apologize for telling the truth. Not to Stephen Colbert. Not to CBS. And not to anyone who thinks patriotism is something to laugh at. The crowd roared. Not with hysteria, but with quiet approval, the kind that grows into action. Somewhere deep in Manhattan, Colbert sat in his office. The studio was quiet. He watched the clip of Vance's town hall on a phone screen. He had lost control of the narrative. The Late Show was meant to mock power, not become a symbol of it. But now he looked like the elite gatekeeper, a part of the very system he once parodied. A CBS executive knocked softly and stepped in. The board wants you to address it tonight. Scripts being rewritten. Colbert leaned back in his chair. Do I apologize? The executive didn't answer. That night, Colbert opened his show with silence. No monologue, no punchlines. Just the camera, steady and close. Last week, this stage became more than a comedy set. It became a battlefield. And maybe I handled it wrong. He paused. We booked a guest. Came with a message. Instead of debate, we ended the conversation. Forced that to take responsibility. There was no applause, just respectful silence. But the damage was done. Back in Washington, Leavitt was preparing for her next press briefing. She shuffled through her notes, then paused. One folder stood out. The flyover memo. Inside it were summaries of small-town feedback, angry calls to congressional offices, letters to local papers, and church sermons quoting J.D. Vance. The thread was common. We are not being heard. Later that day, in front of the press room cameras, Leavitt adjusted the microphone. We've heard America, she said. Not just the coasts, but the communities too often overlooked. The administration believes in open dialogue, in listening. Even when it's uncomfortable. Let that be our path forward. It was subtle. But everyone knew it was a nod to Vance's moment. By the end of the week, J.D. Vance was invited to appear not on a comedy show, but on 60 Minutes. The invitation shocked everyone. Colbert's team released a statement. He said his piece. Now the country wants more. And just like that, the balance had shifted. No longer was J.D. Vance just defending his words. He was redefining the conversation. And across the nation, the audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were leaning in outside the 60-minute studio. The air was cool and heavy. J.D. Vance adjusted his collar as producers led him to the stage. He wasn't nervous, not in the traditional sense, but the weight of what had happened over the past week sat deep in his chest. Inside, the set was quiet. No cheering crowd. No flashy lights. Just polished wood, a neutral-toned backdrop, and the low hum of high-stakes journalism. The interviewer, Dana Whitman, greeted him with a firm handshake. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since Colbert cut my mic," Vance replied. The red light blinked. Cameras rolled. "Senator Vance, millions saw your walk-off from The Late Show. Some called it courageous, others divisive. What do you say to both groups?" Vance took a breath. "I say truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be said. If standing up for people who feel abandoned makes me controversial, so be it." Whitman nodded but didn't flinch. "Critics argue you're fueling outrage, not solutions. That your rhetoric divides instead of unites." Vance leaned forward, voice low but firm. "Unity without truth is fiction. The people I represent, truck drivers in Ohio, nurses in West Virginia, farmers in Iowa, they don't need polished slogans. They need someone willing to say, 'You're not crazy. You're not forgotten.'" Backstage, Caroline Levitt watched. From a quiet monitor room inside the West Wing, she sipped lukewarm coffee, her eyes fixed on the screen. "He's rewriting the script," she murmured. Her assistant, Ellie, raised an eyebrow. Colbert created a headline. But Vance, he's crafting a movement. Across the internet, the interviews spread like wildfire. Hashtags like #UnfilteredVance and #RealTalk trended on X. Pundits scrambled to respond. On CNN, a panel split in two. "Vance is giving voice to grievance," one said. "No," another countered. "He's giving voice to people who've been invisible." On Fox News, clips ran every hour. Finally, a leader not afraid of the mob declared one host. Even independent platforms lit up. Podcasts, live streams. Telegram groups all buzzing with one message. "He said what we've been thinking." In New York, Colbert sat alone in his office again. No laughter in the halls tonight. Just silence and the distant clink of a janitor's mop bucket. He rewound. The 60 Minutes clip. Watched Vance speak, pausing often. He didn't like what he saw, not because it was wrong, but because it was working. "Did I hand him the mic?" he muttered to himself. Back in Washington, Caroline Levitt received a call from the president's senior advisor. "We need to neutralize this," the voice said. "Vance is capitalizing on chaos." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "No," she said, "it's capitalizing on vacuum. A vacuum we created." A pause. "Are you switching sides?" the advisor asked coldly. "No," Caroline said, "telling the truth. And you'd better start listening to it." That night, a private email thread among major media executives leaked. It revealed internal frustration over Colbert's interview handling and concern that late-night television had become too partisan to contain real conversation. The public saw the leak as confirmation of what they had suspected. The elites were scared. And in Ohio, J.D. Vance held another rally, this time in an old factory repurposed as a community hall. There were no teleprompters, no podium, just him. A stool, and hundreds of people sitting on crates, bleachers, lawn chairs, whatever they could find. "You've seen the shows," Vance said, his voice echoing off steel walls. "You've heard the arguments. But here's what I see. They laugh at us until we speak back. Then they panic." The crowd nodded, listened, some clapped. Others just stared intense, quiet, ready. "They think they can cancel a voice by cutting the mic," he continued. "But the truth doesn't need a studio, it needs a nation." Phones lit up. Streams began. And for the second time in a week, J.D. Vance didn't just speak. He ignited something. Back in Washington, Levitt stood by her window, looking out over the city lights. Something had shifted. And everyone from newsrooms to Capitol Hill was starting to realize this wasn't a PR battle anymore. It was a reckoning. The night after the explosive interview, the media wasn't the only institution on fire. Washington, D.C. was watching with clenched jaws. Inside a private room at the Capitol, aides for both parties were huddled around screens. J.D. Vance had become a lightning rod overnight. Half the country hailed him as a truth-teller, the other half called him dangerous. But everyone agreed on one thing. What had happened between him and Colbert was no accident. It looked planned, whispered one Democratic strategist. It wasn't an outburst. He controlled the moment. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance sat in silence in a private meeting room at the Hay Adams Hotel, staring at a message on his encrypted tablet. The sender was known only to a few in political circles. Miles Grantham, a high-level political operative with deep ties to elite donors, PACs, and media brokers. The message was brief. You did what no one's dared. Let's talk. Vance had expected a storm, but not this kind of storm. Backstage sources at CBS leaked transcripts from the Colbert segment to the press. One portion hit especially hard. When Colbert snapped, "So you're justifying insurrection?" And Vance shot back, "No, I'm refusing to ignore the rot that led to it." The clip became a media earthquake. But what came next was worse. An anonymous staffer claimed Colbert demanded that Vance be escorted off stage, immediately. CBS security complied, not because Vance had broken rules, but because he was winning the room. That narrative caught fire in conservative media. Fox News ran a special titled "Silenced on Stage," how J.D. Vance stood alone, while MSNBC aired a counterpanel labeling him a manipulative populist. But in the basement office of an independent news network, journalist Laura Kima, seasoned war reporter turned domestic analyst, saw something different. This wasn't just political theater. She said to her producer, this was a soft test. Vance wasn't just pushing back, he was baiting Colbert. And Colbert fell for it. She began investigating deeper. Why had Vance agreed to the interview? Who approved it? And what did he gain from the explosion? In her research, she discovered a subtle pattern for months. Vance had made calculated appearances not on friendly platforms, but on hostile ones. University panels in blue districts, town halls with combative moderators, even podcasts where he was outnumbered ideologically. Why walk into the lion's den? Her producer asked. Because lions don't expect you to bite back, Laura replied. Elsewhere, in a quiet Georgetown office, Caroline Levitt read a memo from her national media team. It was blunt. Colbert lost control. Vance took the narrative. Our base sees him as unshakable. Though Caroline worked for the administration and had no formal ties to Vance, understood power when she saw it. She picked up the phone and called a trusted contact in the Senate media office. I want his media schedule, she said. Not the public one, the back channel one. Why? The voice asked, because if he's setting up something bigger, I want to see the next move before it hits air. In the following days, protests broke out in Times Square in Los Angeles. Some carried signs reading "Truth isn't treason," while others shouted "Stop the populist lie." Online petitions flooded in, some demanding CBS apologize, others asking them never to platform radicals like Vance again. The country wasn't watching a late-night segment anymore. It was watching a political flashpoint evolve in real time. J.D. Vance released another video shorter, even colder than the first. I walked into that studio knowing I might not walk out. What I didn't expect was how afraid they were. Not of me, of the truth. We're not a nation of punchlines. We're a nation in pain. And someone finally said it out loud. Its approval ratings in battleground states surged 12 points in 48 hours. Political analysts called it a phenomenon by the third day. The question in every newsroom was the same. Did J.D. Vance just launch a silent campaign? But the real question, the one whispered in secure calls and quiet donor meetings, was far more dangerous if Colbert is just the first. Who's the next host he'll burn down on camera? Because this wasn't just J.D. Vance defending himself anymore. This was J.D. Vance declaring war. The fourth day after the Colbert incident brought no commonly more fire. And this time, it wasn't just the media watching. Intelligence briefings from Capitol Hill had begun including notes on domestic narrative escalation. Inside a Pentagon media strategy room, a senior officer slammed a file on the table. This isn't just a viral clip. It's a signal. Vance is being groomed, or he's grooming something. Either way, we're watching a narrative weaponize itself. In a secure hallway of the Eisenhower Executive Office building, Caroline Leavitt walked quickly with a tablet in hand. She wasn't smiling. Her job as White House press secretary had trained her to read media. Storms like whether this one was becoming a Category 5. She clicked play on an internal analytics video, aerial drone footage showing demonstrations across small-town America. Not blue state protests, red state mobilizations in Nebraska. In Kentucky, in her own backyard of New Hampshire, placards read, "Late night lies won't feed my family," and Vance was right. We're done being mocked. This wasn't about January 6th anymore. It wasn't even about Trump. It was about something deeper: cultural rejection. Leavitt pulled out her encrypted phone and sent a single-line message to her deputy. Prep counternarrative. Avoid attacking Vance. Focus on dignity. Middle America is listening. Meanwhile, across the city, J.D. Vance sat at a marble table in a private room at the Federalist Society's headquarters. He was not alone. With him were 3 political architects, 2 former presidential speechwriters, and 1 strategist known only as Cates. It's a man who hadn't appeared on television in a decade, but whose fingerprints were all over the most influential campaigns of the past 20 years. We didn't expect them to cut to commercial, one of the advisors said, pouring a glass of water. But you handled it better than we could have scripted. I didn't script it, Vance replied. I meant every word. Cates leaned forward. Exactly. That's why it worked. Authentic anger plays now, especially when it comes from someone who used to be one of them. Vance paused. What's the next step? The strategist smiled. The next interview. But not with the media, with the people. They laid out a map of small-town community halls, school gymnasiums, and local AM radio stations. Not one stop. In New York, not one in Los Angeles. The tour would start in Iowa. Call it the No Apology Tour if you want, the speechwriter joked. You're not running yet, but you are walking directly into the heartbeat of the country. That same night, Laura Kim, the independent journalist, uploaded her first segment titled Inside the Vance Colbert Fallout. What the media won't say was different than mainstream takes. It wasn't about ideology. It was about tactics. In her 10-minute piece, Laura argued that the entire confrontation was a strategic media trap, one meant to break the illusion of unity in liberal spaces. You watched a populist walk into a progressive space, challenge the host, and split the audience, she said. And in that split, he found a movement. The video clocked 2.1 million views in 5 hours. Elsewhere, Colbert himself remained silent. CBS issued a vague statement about maintaining the integrity of the show and ensuring guest safety. But viewers weren't buying it. The hashtag Let Him Speak hashtag began trending, ironically supported by many who didn't agree with Vance's views. Even progressives were beginning to question why a talk show allegedly built on open conversation shut down its own segment when it got too real. Then, a leak. A CBS stagehand sent an audio file to a podcast host known for breaking unedited news. The recording captured the final seconds before the broadcast cut. You could hear Colbert muttering off mic, "Get him off before this gets worse. I'm not platforming that." That clip was played on conservative airwaves on loop. igniting a new firestorm. Now, it wasn't just J.D. Vance on the line. It was Colbert's brand. It was CBS's brand. It was the idea that mainstream comedy could still host serious dialogue. And just like that, J.D. Vance wasn't simply a senator from Ohio anymore. He had become something more dangerous to the system, a disruptor with a base. And for the first time in years, both sides of the aisle were realizing the same thing: he wasn't going away. He was just getting started. Under the bright lights of the Late Show studio, J.D. Vance stepped onto the stage. The audience clapped loudly, music played, and Stephen Colbert smiled as he stood up to greet his guest. It all felt normal. Just another night. It's just another politician. But what happened next would be talked about for weeks. Vance adjusted his tie and shook Colbert's hand. His face was calm, confident, but inside he was prepared. He knew this wouldn't be just another friendly TV chat. He knew Colbert had an edge, and he wasn't going to hold back. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert began, turning to the camera, "my guest tonight once called Donald Trump noxious. Now he's his biggest cheerleader." The audience laughed, but the laugh had a sting to it. Vance chuckled politely. People grow, and sometimes they realize things aren't as black and white as they thought. Colbert raised an eyebrow. "So, supporting a man you once said was dangerous? That's growth." Vance leaned back in his chair, still calm. "It's seeing the bigger picture. I represent people who feel ignored, people who don't get invited to shows like this. Trump may have flaws, but he fights for them." The room quieted a bit. Colbert wasn't smiling now. "Or maybe," he said, leaning forward, "you realize there's power in loyalty, and abandon your principles for political gain." There were a few nervous chuckles from the audience, but mostly silence. The tension was thickening. The easy back and forth was gone. This wasn't just a chat anymore. It was a confrontation. "I don't need to explain my integrity to anyone," Vance said, his voice steady, "especially not to someone who mocks Middle America from a New York studio." That hit a nerve. Colbert's smile vanished completely. "I don't mock them," he shot back. "I challenge the hypocrisy." "No," Vance replied firmly. "You laugh at them. You turn their pain into jokes while they're worrying about losing their jobs, their homes, or their children to fentanyl. Your audience claps at punchlines about their struggles." The crowd shifted again. Some clapped quietly. Others looked uncomfortable. A few faces in the front row stopped smiling altogether. Backstage, a producer motioned toward the floor manager. They were off script now. The segment had been planned for 8 minutes. It was already hitting the 10-minute mark. But no one moved to stop it yet. Colbert took a breath, trying to steer things back. "Look," he said, "we can debate policies. But when you align yourself with lies about elections, about vaccines, about Ukraine, you're not helping the people you claim to defend. You're misleading them." Vance's tone sharpened. "What about the lies from your side? The ones that told working people everything was fine while their towns fell apart? What about the media selling comfort while ignoring real pain?" "Are you accusing me of ignoring pain?" Colbert snapped. "I'm saying you live in a world where pain is a punchline," Vance replied. "Right? And I live in a world where it's buried next to a soldier's boots." That line hit like a slap. The studio fell dead silent. Even the band in the corner stopped shuffling papers. Colbert looked at his producers off stage, clearly rattled. A red light blinked time to move on. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward again. "You say you're for the people," he said, his voice colder now. "Then why support policies that take away health care, that push division, that question our democracy?" Vance didn't blink. "Because I don't support fake unity. I support truth. And the truth is, your America and mine are two different countries now." Another heavy silence. A few people in the audience were on their phones. One woman had stopped recording. She was just staring. Off stage, the floor manager stepped forward again. This was going off the rails. Vance adjusted his microphone. "You wanted a soundbite, Stephen," he said. "But what you got is a mirror." Colbert's face stiffened. "I walked into this building knowing you'd try to make me the bad guy," Vance said. "I didn't come here to be liked. I came to remind your viewers that there's a country out there you've stopped seeing." One of the producers began waving. The stage manager signaled for commercial. The red light flashed harder now, but the audience didn't move. No applause. It's just silence. Then, without warning, Colbert pushed back from his desk. He looked off stage, then turned to Vance. "I think we're done," he said flatly. Vance stood up, buttoned his jacket, and extended a hand. Colbert didn't take it. He turned away. J.D. Vance walked off stage, not escorted, not pushed, but completely alone. The cameras faded to black. And in that moment, The Late Show had gone from comedy to conflict. And the country was watching. The clip of J.D. Vance walking off stage hit social media before the commercial break even ended. Phones had been rolling in the audience, and within minutes, hashtags like #Vance vs Colbert, #Late Night Meltdown, and #To Americas were trending. But behind the stage curtain, things were even more chaotic. Stephen Colbert stood with his arms crossed, facing his executive producer in the hallway outside the studio. "Why didn't anyone cut it?" he asked sharply. His voice was low but furious. "We signaled twice," the producer replied. "He wasn't backing down. You weren't either." Colbert didn't answer. He just walked back toward his dressing room, shaking his head. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance was in a black car headed uptown, already scrolling through his phone. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't shaken either. His team had expected tension, but not a meltdown on live TV, sir. "We've got Tucker's producers asking if you'll call in tonight," said his aide from the front seat. "Not yet," Vance replied. Let the moment breathe. He knew what he'd done, and he knew the power of a moment like this. By the time he arrived at his hotel, clips of the interview were being dissected across every major outlet. On MSNBC, the narrative was clear. Vance exploited the platform to spread disinformation and perform right-wing martyrdom. On Fox News, they were calling it a rare moment of truth on late-night television. But the most revealing moment came when CNN aired a panel segment titled, "When Politics Interrupts the Punchline." What the Vance-Colbert clash tells us about America. They replayed the scene where Vance said, "You live in a world where pain is a punchline. And I live in a world where it's buried next to a soldier's boots." The panel fell quiet after that line. "This is no longer about entertainment," the anchor said. "It's about who gets to define what's real." Back in Washington, Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary and a rising political force, sat in her office watching the interview replay. She had no love for J.D. Vance, but she respected his ability to seize a moment. And what he had just done was rare. He turned a comedy show into a battleground. Her assistant stepped in. "He's trending higher than Biden right now," he said, placing a tablet on her desk. She nodded slowly, her mind spinning. The administration had kept their distance from Vance since he took office. But now, he had just become a symbol leader of brave truth-telling or dangerous populism, depending on who you asked. Across town, media consultant Miles Grantham was also watching. He represented donors, strategists, and shadowy operators who helped guide public narratives. And Vance's performance had caught his attention. He picked up his phone. "Bring him in," he said. "We might be looking at more than a senator here. We might be looking at 2028. Elsewhere, Colbert sat in silence backstage. He had just finished a long call with CBS executives. They were furious not at him, but at the optics. The network had booked Vance thinking it would be a tense but controlled interview. Instead, it had spiraled into a national spectacle. And the worst part? There was no clear winner. That night, J.D. Vance released a 2-minute video from his hotel room. No production, no edits. Just him and the camera. "When I walked into that studio, I didn't expect agreement," he said. "But I did expect respect." What I found instead was a perfect example of how the political and media elite react. When someone tells them the truth they don't want to hear. I don't hate Stephen Colbert. I pity him. Trapped in a studio where every joke is safe, every laugh rehearsed, and every story filtered. But real America, they don't live in sound bites. They live in struggle. The video was shared over 4 million times in 6 hours. By morning. Headlines read, J.D. Vance's cold exit leaves Colbert's set nation stunned, from senator to culture warrior. J.D. Vance ignites a movement. Colbert breaks silence on-air clash. Not my job to host propaganda backstage. Sources revealed that Colbert had refused to speak to Vance before the show. Vance had entered quietly with only one aide. No makeup touch-ups, no studio walkthrough. He'd sat down, waited, and struck. And in doing so, he changed more than the tone of a show. He changed the way political confrontation could happen on national television. For once, there was no studio applause, no canned laughter, no safe ending, just silence. And in that silence, the country began to choose sides.